Hi, Allie. This is Ira, and I'm recording here my voice feedback or audio feedback to your statement of belief, which I hope will be helpful as you complete your final revisions on the Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts major essay for the course. Um, and essentially, my feedback here is not about what the statement of belief should have been, yada yada yada. It's a perfectly good version of what it was. That's why you get full marks for it. But there are thoughts that I hope you'll take into consideration as you're pushing yourself a little bit on the next assignment, on the assignment that you've drafted, but that you're going back through, and you're thinking about like what it means to rhetorically analyze something deeply, or how you're structuring your definition and thinking about how the different pieces of it fit together. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read back through your paper and offer a few comments, thoughts, things that I think are working well or are particularly cool, and then some spots where I kind of want to challenge you a little bit or push you a little bit further. So, I think this is actually kind of funny. Until recently, my only characteristic would be one that simply made me sway or even completely changed my opinion. Clearly, most arguments weren't up to my standard. That's funny. So recently, so what you're saying, as I take it, is that to think about good argument can't just be defined only in terms of something like total effectivity. It has to be understood in another way. And when you say, I personally struggle to consider certain arguments bad because I genuinely enjoy hearing about a different perspective, but I do believe there are wrong ways of arguing or attempting to persuade, I think you're making a really interesting contrast. You're saying, although arguments that you don't agree with can be good, there are nonetheless cases where somebody would make an argument in a way that's unacceptable. And I think that's an important distinction to make. And I'd like to see you kind of, if you're following up on that distinction in your major essay, I'd like to see you really work out a little more fully exactly what makes, what purpose makes that make sense. In other words, what is the basic goal of argument as you understand it? And so you talk about how coming into an argument unwilling to listen automatically rejects any motion for progress between the two entities. And I want to just encourage you to be careful. Don't get hung up on just two entities. Often there's lots more. And I think this is sort of tricky because, and I like the fact that you bring Regal and Forstall to bear. On the one hand, I sort of agree with you, right? People who argue without, without any interest in hearing what their interlocutors have to say are in some sense doing something wrong, or it's almost not even really argument. But, and this is the tricky part that I think is really important, and Regal and Forstall don't necessarily get us to. What about when people are making an argument in a digital context that is for some other third party? So in other words, what about all, and this is lots and lots of times, what about all the times where people are arguing and it's true, they're not really open to the person they're arguing with, but they are genuinely hoping to persuade somebody else, like you or I coming along reading later. Does that count as argument? Does that make what they're doing count as argument? Can a person not be willing to listen to their interlocutor and yet still be making a good argument in as much as their ultimate audience they have in mind is somebody else, is everybody else who reads it, for instance? Or no? And if so, how does that reshape your definition? And if not, why not? Okay. Kind of moving forward, I like the idea that bad argument is sort of trolling, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about what that means. So you say the amount of people I've met that choose to argue like this is innumerable, especially in a digital context, I no longer consider it a viable argumentation tactic. I'd like to see you explain more why. I don't disagree, but I want to see more explanation why. Why is that unacceptable? Fine, okay, trolls are not really listening. That's fair enough. But why is that bad? What does that do to the possibilities of good argument? And to answer that, again, kind of comes back to what is argument for? And so I think you need to make sure that in your, and again, this is a perfectly good statement of belief, but in your fuller articulation in the major essay, that you're thinking about, okay, so to think about what makes argumentation good, we have to be thinking about what argumentation is for. And I think explaining why trolling is unacceptable or is bad argument is going to require from you a fuller explanation of why we argue and what we ought to be arguing for. I like your turn to quarter and your way to sort of thinking about the idea that it's a misunderstanding that an argument must contain a winner, that someone's mind must be changed. That although, as you say, and I think you put this nicely, changing someone's mind is undoubtedly the ultimate goal of a persuasive argument, the starting and maintaining respect is the most successful approach to argument. I think that's really interesting, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the tension between respectful discourse and effectivity. So on the one hand, I basically, obviously I agree. After all, I assigned you guys quarter. I like quarter quite a bit. But at the same time, it does seem like we want our discourse to be effective, and sometimes totally non-respectful discourse is effective. When that happens, was it good argument? If so, why? If not, why not? And so like similarly, I really like the way that you take up Christopher Ratcliffe, and I really like the idea that you say it's a skill everybody has, but one that's not always easy to put in motion. And I think that's really interesting. I really appreciate that way of thinking about this. It's not like it's some special thing that you have to learn from nowhere, but it is sort of a practice, and that's something you say you want to work on. And I think that's a really cool way of thinking about how rhetorical listening works or should work as a practice. And I also like that you note that actually following these ideals can be tough. And this is where I really want to push you a little bit, because is it when you fail to follow these ideals, does that make what you're doing bad argument? Now, it doesn't mean, when I ask that, I'm not saying that I think trolling, for example, is good. I personally don't. But I think for your theory to work like as a systematic, rigorous theory, you need to be able to explain why exactly are some forms of failure to follow our ideals still, pretty good argument, still okay argument, and other forms are beyond the pale. They're over the line. Where does that line happen? What makes that line happen? How is it related to the purposes of argument? So those are some things that I'm hoping to hear you kind of develop a little bit more. And I'm looking forward to reading your major essay. I enjoyed reading this, and it's really nice to see the ways in which you're taking the theories we're reading quite seriously, engaging with them in a smart and intelligent way, and thinking about like what they mean for you as an arguer. So, in the Defining Good Argument in Digital Context, the major essay, one of the things I'm looking forward to seeing is the ways in which you build on the work that you've done here, and especially by thinking about purpose and how the pieces fit together. So those are kind of my thoughts here. I hope they're helpful, and I look forward to reading you more soon. Thanks.